Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Dale Masi, author of the EAP History Project for the United States and Canada. The History Project is sponsored and funded by the Employee Assistance Research Foundation. The foundation was founded and funded by Carl Tassone to develop and fund research for the EAP field. The video interviews which you are about to see are part 2 of the US and Canada report. There are 8 interviews, each 1 hour long. 6 are US speakers and 2 are Canadian. In writing the history, we developed a conceptual framework of 14 themes, which we think had a major influence on the development of the EAP field. The list was developed jointly by myself and the EAP Research Committee of the Foundation. The experts to be interviewed were selected because of their roles in the evolution of each of these themes and the unique perspectives they bring. Interviews were conducted at the Media Laboratory at the University of Maryland School of Social Work in Baltimore. The university was the subcontractor for this part of the project. The videos will be permanently stored in the Health Science Library EAP archive at the University of Maryland in Baltimore and available to the public. I hope they provide you with helpful insight to this exciting field of employee assistance. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jody Jacobson Frey, and I am very happy to welcome you to the History of Employee Assistance and Work-Life Programs, a 50-year perspective. The project is composed of video interviews with outstanding leaders. We also are including a comprehensive literature review, a written history of the field led by Dr. Dale Masi. As co-principal investigator for the video interview portion of the project, I am honored to conduct this next interview with the principal investigator for the overall project, as well as one of my mentors, Dr. Dale Masi. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Masi before we start. Dr. Masi is Professor Emeritus of the University of Maryland, where she chaired the Employee Assistance Specialization. She is president and CEO of Masi Research Consultants, Inc., which is a Boston company specializing in employee assistance programs in design, implementation, training, and evaluation. She consults for major corporations and organizations and has served on the IBM Mental Health Advisory Board. She has authored 15 books and over 70 articles dealing with EAPs, evaluations, and various mental health issues. Dr. Masi is a licensed clinical social worker as well as a certified employee assistance professional. She holds her doctorate from the Catholic University of America and was the recipient of a postdoctoral research award from the American Association of University Women. She's a Fulbright scholar and has consulted in over 45 countries, as well as for the U.S. State Department and other international organizations. She's an NASW social work pioneer in employee assistance and the first recipient of the International Rhonda G. Sarnat Award. Welcome, Dale, to the interview.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege.
So to start off, let me start by asking you, when did you start in the field? Tell me about your early history.
Well, it was in the 70s, Jody. I was a professor at Boston College in the School of Social Work and Social Planning. And I got a call one day from the dean. And he said, you know, one of our alumni has called us and said we ought to take a look at what this man, Otto Jones, is doing out in Utah. And something called employee assistance, which my dean had never heard of, and neither had I. So I got on the phone and called Otto, who was just delightful. and told me a little bit about the fact that he had been an intern as a social work student at Kennecott Copper. And he decided after he was an intern that there really was a tremendous potential to bring social work into the workplace. So he set up his own company, Human Affairs. Well, I went back to BC and then thought about this. One of the things Otto did tell me, though, is he said, there's a whole allied field called occupational alcoholism. So you might want to look at that, too. Well, fortunately or coincidentally, the Boston Globe was having an ad and an announcement that Harvard was going to have a special conference on the subject of addiction and alcoholism because they were losing so many of their senior former alumni to the problem of addiction. So I called up Harvard and said, could I possibly attend? Well, as you can imagine, the price was astronomical. So I asked them if a poor faculty member could attend, and they were most gracious. And I went to this all-day conference on occupational alcoholism, and it really ignited me. I knew that something exciting was happening. At the time, it was all of the speakers were, most of them from the area of recovering. They were eloquent, and it was clear to me that the future was going to have to go in the direction of professional training. And so I went back and then did a little more into the field of occupational alcoholism and realized that the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism was doing a great deal in this area just starting. And so I contacted them and said, I'm in a school of social work chairing the Masters in Social Planning. And I think that there might be something here for our graduate students. And that started the whole thing.
Wow. The stars truly aligned.
They absolutely. It all came together all of a sudden. And I ended up applying for a training grant from NIAAA to train master's students in occupational alcoholism. And what I did is I set up 5 different centers using my community organization students to chair each place and had placed 2 clinical students in each area. Well, these 5 centers became really quite successful, and we ended up having lots and lots of clients, which was really very interesting and very, very successful. But I learned so much from that, Jody, from that experience.
Tell me a little bit more about these 5 centers and
Yes.
how that led to further steps in your career in the field.
Right. Yes. Thank you, because I think it really was quite important. I decided from the very beginning I wanted to have 5 different approaches to this field of occupational alcoholism. So we established the first consortium with the Chamber of Commerce in 2 cities, Brockton and Taunton. We ended up with 33 companies and again staffed by the 3 students simultaneously. We also then had a federal consortium where we again had over 3 dozen agencies that signed up. And then in addition, I had a program with the telephone company, and that was strictly as an internal program run in the medical department. Another one was the one at the military base for a program for civilians. Each of these was very unique, but the 5th was really something. The government said to me, how can you run around telling everybody to have these programs when your own employer doesn't have one? And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm at Boston College, Irish Catholic Jesuit. What am I going to do about alcohol? Anyway, I had an interview with the president, a Father Monin, who is just wonderful, wonderful man, still is. And I said, father, I said, we're getting all this money, but we're going to have a program for faculty and staff. And he said, don't worry about it, Dale. We can do it, but you don't call it employee assistance because faculty doesn't consider themselves employees. You'll have to call it faculty staff. That became one of the first faculty staff assistance programs. Now, because of that, simultaneously at the same time, Joseph Califano was the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And he was very interested in this whole concept of that all federal agencies should have a program. So he looked around the country because there was a law that had been passed, the Hughes Act, that said that his agency was going to be the model program. And so he went around the country and decided that the program that we ran at Boston College with students, if you can imagine, was the best. And I was brought to Washington to head up the model program. So I left Boston College and went to Washington and then did the exact opposite of what I had done at Boston. In Boston, I had different programs in one geographical location. Running the federal program, we had 175,000 employees in 10 different sites, but they were all across the country. So that gave me the dual experience of running EAPs, both geographically and then functionally.
Wow, what an experience, and such diversity in the types of programs and employees that you saw.
Right. So I was there for 5 years with the federal government, and then Maryland recruited me, so I went to Maryland.
And the rest is history, right?
Well, it's EAP history, at least.
Tell me a little bit about Masi Research. What prompted you to start a for-profit company?
Right. I wish I could say that I prompted myself, but I didn't. Well, as I was with the federal government, towards the end of my time there, two men came into my office, and they had a couple of the books. By then, I had started publishing some of my books. And they said that they were interested when I left the federal government to come and help them establish the largest EAP in the country. Well, I thought, the federal government was pretty large with 175,000, except these were two men from IBM. And they said that we have 225,000 employees plus family members. That gave us 500,000 people. They said the issue is with IBM that when the program is started, it has to start simultaneously for all employees at the same time. We cannot let it flow out incrementally. But then they said to me, we cannot give you a contract as an individual. You have to incorporate and become a company. So it was IBM who actually gave me the idea. And of course, I did that. I also have to tell you that the first check that they gave me literally was for $50,000, but when I deposited, the bank only put in $5,000. They couldn't believe that the IBM had given me, I'm sure a woman, this much money to start a company.
Wow.
So again, that's history too.
Yeah.
I couldn't resist saying that piece.
Oh, definitely. So tell me a little bit about some of the most important historical milestones that you think are related to the field and some of the development of the field.
There are a number of them, and I don't know which ones I would say are more important, but I certainly think that the United States government, with its laws at various times, has been outstanding. The Hughes Act, then the drug-free workplace. That it has really been a strong supporter of the EAP field, and sometimes I don't think we really give our government enough credit for that. Then there are a number of other issues, I think. I think the development of the core technology at least got us to begin to think that, wait a minute, we're doing something different here. We're delivering services in a very unique way, namely the workplace. I think that was really quite important. without a doubt, I'm not saying this is necessarily a positive, but then we had managed care,
Right.
which completely upset the field and turned it almost upside down. That introduced the whole idea of very large health insurance companies coming into the field. And of course, that in many ways, people would say that's really been a mixed blessing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the drug-free workplace, then moving on, certainly work-life,
Mm-hmm.
and the introduction of adding, again, due to IBM, with the idea of child care and elder care services, that was their really innovation, I think was another. But I think it brings us up to today with, I think, the critical incidents response
Mm-hmm.
is clearly one of the newest and fairly most recent developments that I think is today so necessary.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, those are all, I don't know about the order of priority there, but they're all very, very critical and essential to understand in the development.
It certainly affected the field and the
Yeah.
development and the direction it's gone, without a doubt.
You know, in a lot of your books and articles, you talk about essential ingredients of EAP. And I'm
Right.
just wondering, what do you think some of the essential ingredients of an EAP are today, and how have they changed?
Well, first of all, I think we need to think conceptually that we're delivering services in a new arena. I mean, it all started, what I say, with Sigmund Freud with one person on the couch. And then, what happened was along came social work and said, there's something else out there, Sigmund called family. So we had family services and delivery. And then along came NIMH that said, there's something else out there called community. I am now saying that the workplace, this whole arena, is where we are delivering the services. As a result, there are different essential ingredients when you go into the workplace with services, with social services, with human services, than when you're delivering for the family or with the community. I think the essential ingredients are clearly you have to have the role of the supervisor is very important. The role of, as a matter of fact, I think that for some employees, the supervisor is almost on a parallel with family. The same thing with peers in the workplace, essential ingredients. So we have to do supervisory training, we have to do employee education, but we have to deliver a variety of services. EAPs like to pride ourselves in saying that we're preventive, but in order to do prevention, you really have to do prevention. And I think too often we've overemphasized, and I hope my clinical colleagues will not get too upset with this, but I think we have overemphasized the clinical aspect and haven't really developed all of the others. I think the EAP also certainly needs policies. It needs, principles about what we're about. But the biggest probably is understanding the workplace. We have to understand where our employees are actually situated and what's happening in their lives. I mean, many employees probably spend more time at work than they do at home. I don't think that we in the field necessarily have really appreciated what that means. And really we have to look at the environment. I think one of the things we've not done, which is essential, is we have not tried to consult enough with the companies or with the CEOs or with the HR people, that we've concentrated so much on the individual client and the individual employee that we really haven't looked enough at the workplace. What's our role in the workplace? What should we be saying to the workplace about what the issues are? So I think that those are some of the essential things that make EAPs unique.
In thinking about the essential ingredients and some of the critical milestones, how do you think some of them have changed over time? For example, the connection to the workplace, or what you're mentioning about the importance of supervisors and managers, or even labor unions for that matter. How have some of that been influenced with these essential ingredients?
Well, I think labor unions used to be far more powerful than they are now, both in the country and also as far as the EAP field. Labor unions really have been most supportive of the EAP field. And lately, I would say probably since the inception of managed care, I think labor unions have lost a great deal of their importance. And I think, unfortunately, also because they've also really diminished in their numbers in the United States. So they haven't been really as effective, you might say, as they were. I think one of the things that, with the development of managed care and the emphasis, which we can talk at any point about pricing, I think this has thrown us into what I call a business model rather than a professional model. I think this has had dramatic negative effects on the field.
Okay. Has this change into the business model changed some of the essential ingredients of what EAPs are or should be offering?
Well, I personally think so. I think that it's affected the staffing. I think that, first of all, the model is very unusual in that probably 90% of the people that are in the EAP field are what we call affiliates. These are not employees. So we have lost that whole aspect of workers as far as being full-time EAP workers. The people that are the full-time EAP workers are, for the most part, they're marketing people, they're PR people, they're not necessarily the clinical. You might have some clinical supervisors, or you have the people on the phone. So this is unique as far as a business, because most of the people working in it are not employees. They're also working someplace else. So they have divided loyalties. Now, what that has done is that it has allowed the businesses that own the EAPs, in many ways, I think, to exploit them, to exploit these affiliates. Because the affiliates certainly are not organized. They don't know each other. They're all over the country. And I think they get used. And what's happening, I think some of the EAPs have cut their prices. And in cutting their prices, they've also cut the salaries or the per diem, you might say, or per hour of the counselors. This is really, very, very unusual for a profession to operate this way. We used to have far more what we call internal programs, whereby the full EAP staff was employed by the company themselves. We still have very few of those, and they're excellent. I mean, they do a really good job. But then they're all employees. So that really switches, the development of the field. I don't know that we have ever looked at the AP field from this dimension, from a, you might say, management perspective, when your people that are really, operating in the field are not necessarily employees at all, but are all independent contractors.
Seems like it would really make a difference on some of the importance that you talked about with getting into the workplace and understanding the consulting role or potential and being able to do prevention with managers and supervisors.
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, but I don't think the EAP companies want their affiliates near the employer. I mean, they protect their relationship with the employer. So as a result, the employer or the HR person really never meets the people on the firing line who are really meeting their clients and really know what the issues are. I also hold, besides the AP field, I hold the human resource people responsible. I think they have not really looked at the EAP field as much of an asset as it really is. And I think they've, turned a lot of this over to benefit consultants, who, in my opinion, are really not that knowledgeable of how to run an EAP. They're much more involved with the health insurance, which is their priority, which I can understand that. So, I mean, I really hold an organization like SHRM greatly responsible for not really pushing more with their HR people as far as becoming more informed and knowledgeable about what is this EAP field, because we have such tremendous contact with so many employees, and really could make much more of a difference than we are now, and that really has always bothered me. I don't think that the EAP field has seen social change as one of its missions, as far as looking at the workplace, but has seen it much more in a clinical kind of, through a clinical lens rather than the whole aspect of this.
Good. In thinking about, I mean, for many years you taught students and you still teach students about EAP. What do you consider some of the most important principles for students to learn about this field that continues to change and develop? And what's some advice that you might share with students that are listening to this interview?
God bless the students. I love them. I really do. I do, and that's why I'm still teaching online as it is. And it's amazing how there is a complete lack of training in this field. How the heck we have a profession that operates that doesn't have professional training outside of what we've done at Maryland and maybe a few other places, it just appalls me. And so let me just say, I think the students need to understand that we are dealing with the workplace, which is a very different entity. It's not the enemy. I think that's the first thing they have to understand, that the workplace, for the most part, optimistically, if we can be optimistic, for the most part, values its employees. They don't want to lose them, and they would like to keep them, and they don't know what to do. I mean, let's face it, companies are not not experts in the area of mental health, substance abuse. This is, violence, all of these things that we're seeing today. So I think that the students need to understand that this is very important, that they try to interpret to the workplace, what's happening, but that the workplace is there as a positive reinforcement for its employees. So in other words, for their clients, that they have a big asset there with the workplace, and they should use it. The other thing is, many workplaces have many programs that they have. I mean, they have health promotion, they have exercise programs, they have a variety of different kinds of services that the EAP people never become familiar with. They kind of operate in their own little world. They don't get to know the workplace where their employees are. Now, with all due respect, an affiliate has many different clients that come from many different companies. So it's not easy for them to understand all of these different companies and what kind of services they are. I mean, we can go from going to very sophisticated, law firms that have employees, till we go to, a variety of public employees. We go, across the board. So it's important for students to understand the atmosphere of where they're actually working and to use the assets that are there that the employee is entitled to. And I don't think that outside of finding out if they've got health insurance, they don't ask any other questions. And I don't think this is appropriate. I also think that the students need to understand that EAP counseling is very different than mental health counseling. It's not quite the same at all. And they need to understand that. They need to understand the laws. They need to know that sexual harassment is against the law. It's against, in a company, companies get very, very concerned about this subject. Too often, I've seen counselors with a client who might come in and claim being harassed or bullying, but never thinking of somehow getting back to the company to let them know about this. Without breaking confidentiality. I'm not saying this. But for example, I remember one very prominent company we had where we saw when we were doing a clinical review, a number of cases that came in on sexual harassment. But the account manager never thought of going to the company and saying, you know, we're seeing these number of cases, maybe you want to be thinking about this. So I think that it's important for students to see the workplace as a partner with them, that they're there together to help the employee. It's not just the counselor alone that's going to be the savior, and that the job is very important to the client that's sitting in front of them. So they need to know, what is this job like? What is this person doing all day long? Do they like it? Are they good at it? They need to ask far more questions about that. When they're doing family counseling, they'll do an exhaustive history of the family and all of this. But when they do the workplace, they don't ask them any questions. So I think they need to get, you know, their glasses on to get back, as I say, into that whole work environment. I believe strongly that because one is a licensed clinician does not necessarily mean they'll make a good EAP worker at all. That it's very important to understand, you know, what we're dealing with and where we are.
That's great advice for students in the field and thinking of going into the field.
Thanks. Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to take a break.
Okay.
So Dale, I'd love for you to comment on some of our professional organizations in the field and their role with the history and development today, EPA and ISNA.
I would love to comment, okay? Let me just say that, well, first of all, I'm always trying to improve things anyway, so with all fairness, I think that EPA, which was, of course, Almaca, and then, you know, morphed into EPA, I guess I have a lot of concerns about EPA. I feel that, and not only feel, but I think that for the years, I have tried to push them and to get their executives to try to think in terms of looking at the EAP field as a profession and not necessarily as a business for people to make money. I think they have catered too much, frankly, to the business aspect and have not concentrated clearly in the area of accreditation. And I think as a result of that, the way our programs have run and have operated, we have some, I hate to say it, some pretty shoddy stuff out there. But if we had had a profession that had accreditation and standards, and the other thing is, I don't think that EPA has pushed professionalism as far as training. That they have emphasized too much, I think, brief training, not realizing the importance of, I mean, if you're a profession, you need professional training. And they've not necessarily supported that. My last concern about EPA is the fact of the lack of lobbying. I have a lot of concern about the fact that we've not had a voice in Washington. For example, when I testified before the President's Commission on Mental Health, I couldn't believe it when the chairman said to me, "Thank you, Dr. Masi, for coming. You're the only person from the EAP field who has spoken." That really blew my mind. I have chaired, or not only chaired, but I've also been on a number of government committees, and I don't see EPA as a force in this. I don't see, for example, with the whole Affordable Care Act, they were not necessarily lobbying one way or the other. I think this is due, frankly, the fact that geographically, the office has not necessarily been located, even though it's supposed to be in the Washington area. It really hasn't been. It hasn't had its sights set on Washington, which, in my opinion, we would have, as a profession in a field, gone much, much further ahead if EPA had been there. Now, on the other hand, I think the people from ISNA, when they started it, tried. They were very frustrated with the lack of accreditation. That's why they started, and tried to do that themselves, and the lack of research. Unfortunately, they really couldn't compete in size with EPA. So they ended up, being much smaller, and still to this day, and I think, frankly, have too much of a Canadian emphasis. I just think that both these organizations, whether they like it or not, need to get together. We don't need two different organizations, particularly when both of them are centered in North America, though EPA is certainly international in many ways. So I think that the professional associations, I don't think, have really lived up to the kind of job that I think they should have. The other thing that makes no sense is when one goes to a national conference, the exhibits are all from substance abuse. Mostly it would be, I'd say, 70, 80, 90% of what's supporting this are now God love them. God love the treatment centers, but where are the companies? Why don't we have companies exhibiting? Why don't we have, businesses there? We don't see that. We don't see some of the major EAP providers don't have exhibits. So I think there's just an awful lot that really hasn't, been done in that area. Now, on the other hand, we have Europe, with the European Forum, and then we've got the group in Asia as well. So somehow, if we're going to have a profession, we have to have common concepts, common knowledge, common principles. We're supposed to have something in common. So in other words, no matter what your profession or how you practice, in other words, if you're a physician, you don't do, you don't treat diabetes one way in Canada and another way in Japan. Well, if you're doing that with something like EAPs, we need to have a universality, which we do not have. And I think that has a very negative effect on the international, and the international is growing so much that I think there's real problems. One last organization, I already talked about SHRM, which I think they're not doing enough of the EAP field, but I think I'm also concerned about the Council on Accreditation, which in many ways is supposed to be accrediting the EAPs, but try to go on the website and find the EAP standards. It's quite a search. It doesn't jump up at you. It's not right there. So I still think that accreditation is the way EPA should be going, and they should be doing it.
Well, it's great to hear your feedback about the organizations and the potential for where they can go in the future.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Right, and they should go in that direction.
You talked just now about some of the global professional organizations, and I'm wondering if you can talk more about globalization itself as a construct and a phenomena and how that's affected the development of the EAP field.
There's no doubt about the growth in the international arena. I, as you know, for the university, teach the online EAP school or certificate program. We're averaging at least 1/3 of our classes are from students from other countries.
Wow.
Now, when I say other countries, we're not just talking about UK and the Commonwealth. I've had them from Mongolia, Senegal. I've had them from every continent, which is just amazing.
It is.
The growth and the interest in the EAP field. In some ways, it's almost electric the way it's caught on. It's caught on in some ways more than the growth in the U.S., even though it's grown in the U.S. clearly and now very acceptable. the thing that's most interesting to me are two aspects of it. Is number one, the acceptance of counseling. That, you know, many people were biased and said, oh no, you'll never be able to have counseling in China. You'll never be able to have it in some of the behind the Iron Curtain. You know, you'll never, when it was there, you'll never be able to have it in some of these countries. They won't do this. And it has certainly taken off, the idea. Now, in some countries, they still might emphasize telephone counseling, but the idea of counseling has not been so negative as I think people anticipated that it would be. For example, in Japan, Japan is the only country in the world that has a law that says all workplaces must have a mental health program. Wow. Now that started, that's why the EAPs flourish in Japan. Japan also has 2 EAPA chapters, it's that big. The reason that happened is because of a senior executive threw himself in front of the bullet train and his wife sued the company saying that he did this because of work stress, that he was working 16 hours a day. Well, nobody expected her to win, but she did in the courts. And that then set, you know, Japan on a path where they had to provide, that's where the law passed.
Interesting.
So there's no doubt that, you know, internationally, the EAPs have arrived. Now, there's one downside to this, and it's really, in some ways, I'd like to say it's amusing, but it's not. It's sad. It really is sad. The lack of recognition of substance abuse. I mean, no matter what country you go to, very rarely will they admit that they've got a substance abuse problem, including Russia. I've been there twice. I mean, you know, they've trying to get across to them, you know, that there really is a problem, not necessarily Russia alone, but country after country. I think of all of them, the UK is the most defensive and probably has, you know, amongst among their countries, some of the highest rates of addiction. So we have a long way to go internationally in educating people, and I don't think the Americans or the American EAPs or that have gone into the other countries have really emphasized this enough or accepted, again, a professional responsibility to really teach them. And I have one very poignant example of this back to Russia. When I lectured there, the State Department sent me, and I lectured, they call their companies enterprises. And there must have been about 75 companies in the room, in the hotel. And when I got done lecturing, and I emphasized strongly alcoholism and substance abuse. I mean, when I lecture overseas, I don't mince my words about that being a problem. Anyway, when I was done, these men came up to me and said, you must meet with us. You must meet with us. It's very, very important. And I said, who are you? Who are you? They said, we are the physicians at the nuclear power plant. I said, absolutely, I need to meet with you. I'm happy to meet with you. Well, when I met with them, they told me that in Russia, the employees thought that at the nuclear power plants that alcohol would prevent radioactivity. And they said, frankly, we think Chernobyl was due to alcoholism. Wow. So that you know, I came back, I wrote articles, I went to the Department of Defense with this. I mean, we have a long way to go in that area.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't mean to lecture, but I couldn't, you know, it still made me shudder when I heard that.
Yeah, wow. Amazing. In thinking about some of the comments you've made about the professionalism and the business model, how do you think this trend of mergers and acquisitions, especially in the U.S., has affected the shift that you're observing?
Well, I think it shifted towards a strictly business model, making money. And I'm also very concerned about these free EAPs because that have been packaged as a way of inducing people to buy health insurance and will throw in a free EAP. It's horrible. That's terrible. and then then HR people or the benefits people think that they've got an EAP and they really do not have an EAP. So I think that's I think it's not been necessarily good, because what's happened is they've become so large, the EAPs. Now, on the other hand, I still see many regional EAPs. I think there are a lot of regional EAPs. God love them. And, I think they do a good job in their communities, and they're much more attached to their communities than, say, the big nationals, because they know what's going on in their area, sometimes to the extreme. I know when I moved up to New England, and the first client I wrote an RFP, and they said, but we have to have an EAP in New England. It has to come from there. And I said, why? And I realized it was localism, you might say. So, but I do think the regionals do a really much better job than, say, the big ones necessarily at all.
In thinking about the globalization, the growth of these large EAPs, I mean, clearly one of the changes in the field is the use and reliance on technology.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you see that affecting and its role in the field? Well,
again, we got to watch the big ones for making money, because they see this as a great opportunity. We can text, we can do telephone counseling. We don't have to worry about paying these affiliates to see people face to face. I think we got to be really careful. I am not opposed to technology. I think it's bound to be very valuable for us, but we've got to have quality assurance, particularly for the clinical. I'm very concerned about places that are offering groups on, on the web, things like this. So I think no matter what we do in this area, I think we've got to parallel it with research and really studying, are these other methods effective? They well might be, and I'm not opposed to them. I think we should push technology in all areas of EAP before we necessarily push the clinical. I think we need to think more of, there's so many ways we can do prevention, so many ways we can do outreach, and I think those things we really ought to do. I don't think we've developed enough technologically that way. My concern is that the technology is not used as a way of avoiding, as I say, the one-to-one and paying the affiliates by the hour. So I think we need to keep our eyes open to this particular development. And the other thing is, in any of the research that we do, we don't use control groups. So, I mean, I am not satisfied to see that the way we measure if a program is successful or not is by self-report. I mean, I think we've got to look the way we did with the federal government, that the first day I went with the federal government, he said to me, you got to prove this program is cost effective. But the feds really invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in the cost benefit study we did. But the primary thing that we did is we had control groups of people that were not in the EAP field. And that's the method I've always used in doing cost benefit for any of my clients. You've got to measure the EAP clients against those that don't use the EAP with the same, you might say, productivity cost. So I think that, again, back to technology, I think that we've really got to develop much more quality assurance in research, Jody. So you really, as a researcher, you're the one I look to see moving in this development and area.
I'm glad you mentioned research, because I wanted to hear a little bit more about your perspectives of, what research has been done in the field and what some of the areas or innovative interventions that you think really need to be researched moving forward.
Well, I think Carl Tassone deserves a great deal of credit for putting at least this first million, $1 million into this research foundation. There has been no emphasis on the part of the EAP field in the area of research. I mean, it's a struggle, you know that. I don't have to emphasize that, to get any kind of money where you might be eligible for any kind of research money to look at EAPs. And I think the field, again, EPA has not pushed for this, for the idea of really getting some support, but good research. But that comes, it's rather than, I mean, I've been shocked by some of the studies that tried to pass themselves off as research. You know that as well as I do. And I think that there's no field, no profession can survive without research. And that's why I think the Research Foundation with Carl, he deserves, but let me tell you, in trying to raise other money, because he said he'd match any money that came in, it has been, I cannot believe that these large EAPs have not supported the Research Foundation. I mean, what they've given has been so minor. So, I mean, it's not good. That again tells us the emphasis on this business model.
So we've got issues of lack of research and issues of business model, lack of professionalism. What are some other weaknesses that you see in the field, major weaknesses? And then we'll have an opportunity to talk about some strengths.
Okay, well, I think that let me just say, I don't think it's a weakness or a strength, but I do want to comment on this, which is kind of my latest idea, the way I see the EAP field. I think we're at a critical point right now, and I don't think the field realizes it. I don't think employers care anymore about the cost effectiveness. If we save money, that's not why they have an EAP today. I've talked to enough CEOs. They want an EAP, but the reason they want it is because they realize far more than the EAP field does, I think, of what the times are that we're living in now. People, they realize they're living with addiction, with the opiate. They're living in the whole idea of the, as you know, as a researcher in suicide, the rate of suicide, the rate of trauma, of domestic violence. They know they've got it in the workplace. We have an organization in Boston here, which is Employers Against Domestic Violence. It's a whole organization. So, I mean, as one CEO said to me, the reason I want the EAP is I know that if there's a trauma, if there's a death, if there's a terrorist attack, I have somebody I can go to. I think as an EAP, we're missing the boat. That we're still talking about saving money, of productivity. I don't think that's where companies are today. They've moved ahead. They're trying to live in the world the way it is with their employees. They're trying to help their employees, and I think, I feel, as a matter of fact, I'm going to write about this because I feel really strongly that we're missing the boat on the importance, and that's again back to our clinical, where it can rejuvenate the whole clinical arena for us in the fact of dealing with trauma. I mean, if there's one thing we know, if there's a critical incident, EAP's there. And I've seen, even as an evaluator, they get there. They get to, no matter where the trauma is, where the death took place, where the violence is occurring, they somehow get somebody there. And I think we don't realize, and we've not used that enough with corporations and businesses, but I think that's why EAPs are so popular today. So I just think that's a strength, that we really, really haven't touched on.
I agree. What are some other opportunities or strengths of EAPs that you see moving forward?
Well, I think the fact of global and the fact that we're really one world, and that we need to work together. And I think that that's why I think that we really got to become much more one organization, or one, but really have to develop the quality and the standards that we need. So I think we need to use the international more and to really meld with it. I also think we need to go to the government. I think right now, there is a government that is, at least in the U.S., that certainly is pro-us, you might say, or pro-EAP. Hopefully, that will also be the next administration. I can't resist that. So, I think we have an opportunity, particularly depending upon the election for the United States particularly, of really capitalizing on who we are. But we need to get our act together. We need to get ourselves together and who we are, who are our leaders, who can really speak for us. And I think we got to think about that, because I'm not sure that we've really got the spokespeople that we might need at this point.
Great ideas. Are there other things that I have neglected to ask you that are important in terms of the history and development of the EAP field? Any anecdotes, stories, or words of wisdom that you'd like to offer?
Thank you. I would just say that for everyone out there, I, as a social worker, I did a lot of different things in social work before I got in the EAP field. I ran a prisoners program, and I started a homemaker program, and I was very active in the civil rights movement and all of that. But once I landed in this EAP field, it's like magic. And I think that's what I would say to professionals out there. Catch that magic. It's more than having, and I don't mean to demean the idea of having one person in front of you. It's more than that. It's a bigger issue. It really affects society as a whole, because you're dealing with the economy. You're dealing with the workplace. I would strongly encourage the students particularly to read the Wall Street Journal. It's not going to ignite in front of you. Get to know what the workplace is about. Begin to understand it, because let's face it, it's the major thing in our lives. The other thing I see is people are living longer, and certainly living longer, and I think this is a big concern to women. And to, I say this to my women students, before you know it, your kids are going to be gone, and you're going to have another 40 years of work ahead of you. So you better find something that you like and that you're dedicated to. So the idea of, retirement at 65 is a joke. That's not going to happen, because what are people going to do for the next 30 years? So, I think the value of work, and to see it as a positive for all of us, and to make it fun and, intellectually stimulating, is what it's all about.
Thank you, Dale. It's really been an honor to do this interview of you for this such important project. And so before we end, if you have some other comments. Yeah.
What I want to say is that you are my star. So you're really, sitting there as somebody that I've mentored is a living example of what it can be for the future.
Oh,
thank you, Jody.
Well, thank you, Dale, for all the mentoring that you have done and that you continue to do for me and for so many people in the field.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.